This is my 1999 BMW 323i convertible. It's an automatic. It's been my daily driver for, I don't know, a year and a half, almost 2 years now. I love it. It never gives me any real issues. Interior is a little bit dirty. Could use seats and definitely a 5-speed swap, which is what I'm finally going to get around to do, because I've been driving this for a while now this summer and she needs some help, and it'd be nice to park her up for a little bit to give her a little bit of maintenance and drive this again. But I really do not want to drive the automatic, so let's 5-speed swap it. So these are all the components you need to do the 5-speed swap on your E36. Pressure plate, clutch, flywheel. You do not need the back half of the drive shaft. You only need the front half that is matching your transmission. You need the transmission support bracket from the manual transmission. The transmission mounts are the same. You can reuse them. Get drag is the same as the automatic, but if you're doing a ZF swap, you need the flex disc from the ZF. You need the shifter assembly. This is a chassis mount and the shift selector rod. Pressure plate bolts, flywheel bolts. The bell housing bolts, I was told they're a little different. I can do a side-by-side comparison on that in a second. These bolts are for the chassis mount. These two are for the transmission support bracket, and these three attach the drive shaft to the flex disc. In this box, we've got the throwout bearing and the input shaft bearing. We've got the slave cylinder with the flexible line on it. We've got the master cylinder with the hard line on it. We've got this line which feeds the master cylinder, and this line goes to your reservoir. Now, you don't need the reservoir from the factory. All E36s come with this nipple, and all you have to do is cut the end off of it. You can see this one was actually off of an automatic car, and the end is cut. Not all that great, but as long as you have that hole there, it'll work for you. I actually think I have an automatic one over here on the shelf. Yep, there it is. And you can see it's just not cut. The hole is plugged up. Yeah, it's just a hole that's plugged up. You just got to cut the tip off. And when you cut the tip off, you are able to attach a hose and have it go to the master cylinder. Which brings you to the pedal assembly. Now, the pedal assembly is actually exactly the same from automatic to manual. The only difference is the pedals. You need a brake pedal and you need a clutch pedal. You don't necessarily have to buy the whole assembly. You only need the brake and the clutch. Now, with the clutch, you need the pin that holds this on. You need this pin. You need this spring, which sits on here like this. And this little cap sits on here like that. and that's how your clutch pedal ends up working. It just sits in there, and that's how you get the spring. So you need all of that. You don't need a clutch switch, but if you want a clutch switch, by all means, attach a clutch switch. This is where my car gets parked. These are all my parts and stuff. All of that 5-speed swap was on the shelves yesterday. But there was 1, 2, 3 cars here and another car in the lift bay. So I had to move the 3 cars. I had to move my car. And now hopefully I can get this done in one day, because the wagon, the sedan, and the 5 Series all need to go back into the shop before I leave. Well, that's enough talking about what's going on and what I'm doing. I'm going to set the camera up and get into taking this thing apart. I'm gonna start up top. I'm gonna take the intake manifold off, take the starter off, get the torque converter bolts off, and do everything that I need to do up here as far as removing the auto trans, and then I will get below the car and start taking the transmission out of the car itself. The first step in getting the intake manifold off is to remove the fuel rail, injectors, and the electronic clips for the injectors. The electrical connectors give me a little bit of a problem with the metal clips, but it's nothing that a 90-degree pick can't easily solve. And once the electrical connectors are off, you can slowly pull the fuel rail up out of the intake manifold. Most of the time, the injectors will stay in the fuel rail, and you'll only have to worry about reseating them into the manifold. I'm now taking the throttle body off. The OBD2 cars have a 2-piece throttle body where the throttle body is cable driven, but it also has an electronic override that they use for traction control. I don't run the traction control, so it is just unplugged. However, there's still a butterfly valve that you need to remove in order to get to the throttle body. So I always do this thing when I'm working on cars where I try and find a shortcut, and by trying to find the shortcut and avoiding doing 2 minutes of work, I end up spending 5 to 10 minutes on trying to avoid that 2 minutes of work. And then in the end, I end up doing that extra 2 minutes of work anyways. I don't know why I do it. It just happens. I try and save myself time and end up costing myself time. But this is exactly what I'm doing right here. I was trying to avoid having to take the cowl and everything off by the windshield so I could get to the final intake manifold nut. But I couldn't get to it. So in the end, I ended up having to take all the stuff off anyways. Intake manifold off, gasket looks good, as it should, since I just replaced it when I had to do the starter. Best friend. Okay, so you got to check this out. When I bought this car, I got it cheap because the previous owner couldn't figure out an overheating issue. They had the head gasket done, they did the water pump, they did the fan, they did a whole bunch of things, but it kept losing coolant and kept overheating on them after a while. And this right here is not supposed to be here. That fitting, that's supposed to be a solid hose from the head here to the heater core valve here. Now you can see that it's not in place because the hose that they put on is too long. And what was happening is this clamp, as you can see, this is a factory clamp. This is not a factory clamp. This clamp was leaking a little bit, and it would leak onto the transmission and burn off. So they never saw a leak on the ground because it would burn off on the transmission. But that's the mystery of where the coolant is going in this car. Okay, so with the manifold off, I can now go underneath the car and start removing the transmission. So this is probably the favorite tool that anyone has ever recommended me. It's a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter, but it's also 3 feet long, so that you don't have to put a bunch of adapters together or a bunch of extensions to try and get the those bolt things off, whatever they're called, the bell housing bolts. So you can just attach it to your 1/2 inch drive, ratchet, or electric impact, and you can throw on your Torx bit adapter, and you're ready to pull your E36 transmission. Here I'm just trying to gain access to the transmission tunnel. I have to drop the exhaust off of the hangers so I can let it hang. Above the exhaust is a heat shield, which you will see me take down off of the car in a second. And then above the heat shield is the drive shaft. So I need to drop all of this stuff underneath the car. There goes the heat shield. So that I'm able to get at the transmission here. Well, that was fun. You gotta love getting dirt in your eyes. My favorite. Favorite thing about working on old BMWs. Just cars that are driven daily in general. I'll be using those stock bushings. Now I'm starting to remove everything off of the transmission. There's a cable for the shifter. There is a connector for the reverse switch. There's also a connector for like all of the gear selection. I'm also noticing that it's going to be much harder to remove the oil cooler lines than I was expecting it to be. They are a hard line all the way from the transmission to the front of the car, and they go over the subframe. So I definitely just had to cut them to remove them because I didn't want to take any extra stuff off. But gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. So for your drive shaft, you just have to swap this out to the one that matches with the transmission that you're using. So the rear half stays the same, and I'll be switching from the E36 auto shaft to an E36 get drag 5-speed shaft. So that can go to the automatic side with the stuff that I don't need. Okay, that's that guy. And now there's just one more. I am gonna bring the car down a little bit because I do need to get up top now, because I'm basically done down here until I'm ready to actually pull the trans out. Here, I'm just trying to decide what's going to be the best course of action to remove the torque converter bolts. You can either access them through the hole in the starter, or there is a little hole over on the passenger side underneath in the trans tunnel where you're able to access them as well. Both places kind of stink, so you kind of got to go with what you're feeling and what you have access to, but this is what I'm trying to decide. So the torque converter bolts, you access them through the hole here for the starter, and they're right in there. Let's see if I can get a little brighter. Right there. Torque converter bolt. I believe there's 3 of them. So I'm just turning the motor over at the crank hub. Turning the motor over at the crank hub until the torque converter bolts show themselves in the hole for the starter. This has to be the worst part about trying to remove the torque converter bolts, is as you spin the crank, trying to line them up in the hole for the starter. As you saw there, I tried to access one of the torque converter bolts from underneath, but it's honestly easier to get them from the top just because there's more room to swing the ratchet. Underneath you can access them, but there's not really that much room to get any sort of leverage to remove them. So after about maybe 3 hours of work, the transmission is out. I've got this pile of stuff that is staying on the car. It's a little auto trans fluid from the transmission, some tools. This is all of the auto hardware and drive shaft and stuff that I'm not going to be using. Um, but it's break time. I am starving. So when I purchased this 5-speed swap, the guy I bought it from was adamant that I needed all of the bell housing bolts because they're different. And as you can see, these are the ones he gave me. And these are the ones that are off of the automatic. They're the same. They're the same length. They're the same thread pitch. Everything is the same. So you do not need new hardware. You do not need bell housing bolts. The bell housing bolts will work. I am going to use these ones because they're nicer. But the automatic transmission bell housing bolts are exactly the same. They're not any different. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Flywheel is going on now. Normally I would buy all new hardware to go with the new clutch kit, but everything is used on this kit, so I'm just using what I got. Everything is getting red Loctite. Don't forget to put your dust shield on before you put your flywheel on so you don't have to cut it. I've got a breaker bar on the front of the motor. The flywheel bolts get torqued to 77 pound-feet or 105 newton meters, and then the pressure plate bolts get torqued to 18 pound-feet. So I'm going to torque the flywheel bolts. I've already torqued them in sequence. Now I'm just going to go through in a circle and make sure that they are all torqued and that I didn't miss anything. And I like the click. So this is the trans bracket from the auto. And this is for the manual. You can see they are quite different. These solid mounts came with my swap, but even on my turbo car, I run factory rubber trans mounts, so these literally have less than 10,000 miles on them. So I'm just going to take these off of this bracket and put them on this bracket. It's not like I have any other aftermarket bushings on this car anyways. It's all factory as it is, so no sense in putting harder trans brackets in when I can just use these factory ones. My phone died earlier, but I finished everything up underneath. The 5-speed is installed, the drive shaft is installed, the exhaust is back on, the heat shield is back on. Everything is good to go underneath until I am ready to bleed the hydraulics for the clutch. I talked earlier about this fitting right here and how there was a minor leak. I got probably 2 full turns on this clamp, about a turn and a half on this clamp, and then on this clamp down here I got probably another turn. So I don't know who installed this little section of hose right here, but they must have been afraid of over tightening it or something, but it was not tight enough. Should be good now. I'm ready to install the starter, and then I can do the lines for the master cylinder and slave cylinder while I have everything torn apart in here, because they have to go down in here. There's a hole in the firewall, and that's where it's got to come out. It's easier if you take the whole brake booster and brake master cylinder and reservoir out, but I really don't want to do that. And I've installed the lines without taking it out before, so let's get to it. The auto to manual wiring is super simple. It's simple as taking the automatic transmission, the shifter, the plug, finding the wires that go to the neutral safety switch, which is it's activated when the car is in park or in neutral, so you're able to start the car. Now, since this is a manual now, it could be in gear, and you might want to have to press the clutch to start the car so that the car doesn't just accidentally roll away. Now, for that to happen, you just take these two wires, the green, white, and the brown, black, and you wire them to the clutch switch. Now, when you do that, it'll make it so that when you press the clutch, these two complete the circuit, and then you're able to start the car. But the way I'm going to do it, I'm just going to cut these, splice them together, and then just make sure that my car is in neutral before I start it. So I clipped the two wires for the neutral safety switch. They are crimped together. Car is in neutral. Foot is off of the clutch. Keys in the ignition. On. Fires up. And I can put my foot on the clutch. Put it in reverse. First, second, and third, and fourth, and fifth. Definitely got a bit of a fifth gear lean to it. But you know what? It's way better than the automatic, and I'm so excited to drive it. So I still have to do the wiring for the reverse lights and the wiring to keep cruise control working, but besides that, 5-speed swap is all done. Swapping from the automatic interior to the manual interior is super simple. If I wasn't using a chassis mount shifter, I would need a rubber boot that goes around this circle. And then around here, there's also a piece of foam that helps absorb heat and noise. Besides that, for the shift area, you'll just need the leather boot that covers the shift area, and that'll go right over there like that. The other thing that needs to be modified is where the pedals go. So this is where the gas pedal goes. This is where the brake pedal goes. And you just need to cut out this spot right here, so there will be room for the clutch pedal. And that's where the clutch pedal goes. So you can cut it out a few different ways. On my other car, I just used a pair of snips. For this car, I will probably just use an angle grinder, just because This is already cracked a little bit. I'm not trying to be super precise with the cut, and the angle grinder will definitely be the easiest. As I stated before, the wiring for the 5-speed swap is super simple. You have to loop the brown with the black tracer and the green with the white tracer. That tricks the car into thinking that it's in neutral. You can also put these two wires to a clutch switch if you would like to have to press the clutch when you start the car. For the reverse lights, you take this plug that goes to the reverse light switch on the transmission, and you wire it to, you just cut it out of the automatic transmission loom, and you wire one of the wires to the green and gray and the other wire to the blue and yellow. And when you do that, it tricks the car into turning the reverse lights on when you go into reverse. So this is what the automatic plug looks like. So what you do is you loop these two to get it to start, and these two to get the reverse lights to work. Super simple. This is the diagram for the cruise control. As you can see, the automatic switch is here. The transmission control system comes off of here as well. And if you follow it down, it's a brown and black wire, and it's on pin number 5. And if you have an early model car, so OBD1, it will be pin 25. Again, early model, pin 25. So then you come over here to the car. Behind the glove box, this is the cruise control module. It has a plastic plug that goes into the back of it. This flips up and it pops out. Then you're able to pop that clip and the clip on this side. You see the little slits there? You pop those and this piece slides out. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but these are all numbered. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is pin 5, and it's a brown and black wire. So to get the cruise control to work, you just cut this wire, you put the plug back together, and you put everything back together. And then the cruise control should work. So I realized after going to put the clips together for the video that I didn't actually film any sort of conclusion or outro to the video. And for that, I honestly have the most respect for all of the people who do YouTube on the daily or weekly or however often you do it. I filmed this video in, I don't know, probably 2 months ago, and I'm just now getting to the editing and putting it together. So I can only imagine what you guys actually go through with filming videos weekly or daily or however often you do it. It's just amazing. Hats off to you. But anyways, the swap took me about 10 hours to complete. The first day that I worked on it, I worked for about 8 hours. And that day I removed the auto, installed the manual, and got it to a point where the car could start and drive. The following 2 hours I completed on another day, and that day consisted of buttoning up the interior, finishing the wiring for the reverse lights and the cruise control, and then just taking the car for a test drive and seeing how it does. After driving the car for a couple months, I have no complaints with it, and I'm so glad that I actually did do the 5-speed swap. The only thing that I would have done differently with it being a daily driver is I probably would have not used the chassis mount shifter and opted for the stock shifter arm and bushing setup. But with that said, it is still much more enjoyable to drive as a 5-speed versus as automatic, so I'm still very happy with my decision. Now, obviously it's not as fun as driving the turbo sedan around, but it still makes it much more fun with it being a 5-speed. But that's going to be it for this video. Again, if you have any questions about anything, or if you feel like I missed something, don't forget to comment. Please like the video. This is my first YouTube video. I don't know where my channel is going to go from here, or how often I'm going to post or whatnot, but obviously the more feedback I get from you guys,